some notes on this. I'm going to probably skip some of the reference material here that's referred, just so that this can, as I read it, it'll flow a little bit better. But I'll try to hold the phone so that those references can be seen clearly on screen. And I'm going to continue in Appendix 25. The progeny of the fallen angels with the daughter of Adam. See notes on Genesis 6 and Appendix 23. They are called in Genesis 6 nephelium, which means fallen ones, from nephal to fall. What these beings were can be gathered only from the scriptures. That's always a good place to start. There's plenty of information in the Bible about these beings, basically, and there's so much information there that it's always a good place to start. And I'm going to continue. They were evidently great in size, as well as great in wickedness. They were superhuman, abnormal beings, and their destruction was necessary for the preservation of the human race and for the faithfulness of Jehovah's word. Genesis 3:15. This was why the flood was brought upon the world of the ungodly, as prophesied by Enoch. But we read of the Nephilium again in Numbers 13:33. There we saw the Nephilium, the sons of Anak, which come from Nephilium. How, it may be asked, could this be if they were all destroyed in the flood? It's a very well-placed question there. Keeping in mind that this is a little bit of commentary, keeping in mind that when Noah was ordered to take 2 of every animal, he was also ordered to take 2 of every flesh. That didn't mean that he was going to be ordered to take 2 of every evil flesh or evil entities. It just meant that there were 2 of every flesh in that region, perhaps, that were going to be taken with him. But take a close look at 2 of every flesh, and that should help clarify that just a little better. So, and I'm going to continue reading. The answer is contained in Genesis 6:4, where we read, "There were Nephilim in the earth in those days, for instance, in the days of Noah, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them. And the same became the mighty men." The word Hebrew, it would be Gibber, which is the heroes, which were of old, men of renown, literally, men of the name, for instance, who got a name and were removed for their ungodliness. So, after that, for instance, the flood, there's a second eruption of these fallen angels, evidently smaller in number and more limited in area, for they were, for the most part, confined to Canaan, and were in fact known as the nations of Canaan. It was for the destruction of these that the sword of Israel was necessary, as the flood had been before. As to the date of the second eruption, it was evidently soon after it became known that the seed was to come through Abraham. For when he came out from Haran, Genesis 6:12, he entered Canaan. The significant fact is stated. The Canaanite was then, for instance, already in the land. And in Genesis 14:5, they were already known as Rephaim, and Emim, and had established themselves at Ashtaroth Karnaim and Savah Kirithaim. In chapters 15, 18, 21, they are enumerated and named among the Canaanite peoples. Kenites, and the Kenizzites, and the Kadamites, and the Hittites, and the Perizzites, and the Rephaim, and the Amorites, and the Gigashites, and the Jebusites. These were to be cut off and driven out and utterly destroyed. But Israel failed in this. And you can read that here in Judges 1:19 and so on. And we know not how many got away to other countries to escape the general destruction. It's a very compelling statement, but it's true. If this was recognized, it would go far to solve many problems connected with anthropology. Yes, it would. As to their names, they were called Anakim, from one Anak, which came from the Nephilim, Numbers 13:23, and Rephaim, from Rapha, another notable one among them. From Deuteronomy 2:10, they were known by some as Emim and Horam and Zamzumim and Avim and etc. As Rephaim, they were well known and are often mentioned, but unfortunately, instead of this, their proper name being preserved, it is variously translated as dead, deceased, or giants. These Rephaim are to have no resurrection. This fact is stated in Isaiah 26:14, where the proper name is rendered deceased. In verse 19, where it is rendered the dead. It is rendered dead 7 times. It is rendered deceased in Isaiah 26:14. It is retained as a proper name, Rephaim, 10 times. 2 being in this margin here. Right here in Genesis, and there's one section of the margin, and this is another section of the margin. In all other places it is rendered giants, Genesis 6:4, Numbers 23:33, where it is Nephelium, in Job 16:14, where it is Gibber. It's appendix 14:4. I may read that one after this. Continuing, by reading all these passages, the Bible student may know that all that can be known about these beings. At least from the scriptures, you sure can. It's always a really good place to start, that's for sure. It is certain that the second eruption took place before Genesis 14. For there the Rephaim were mixed up with the 5 nations or peoples, which included Sodom and Gomorrah, and were defeated by the 4 kings under Chedorlaomer, I think that's how it's said. Continuing, their principal locality, evidently, Ashtaroth Karnim, while the Emim were in the plain of Kirathaim, Genesis 14:5. Anak was noted descendant of the Nephilim, and Rapha was another, giving their names respectively to different clans. Anak, father was Arba, the original builder of Hebron. And this Palestine branch of the Anakim was not called Abraham after him, but after Anakim, after Anak. They were great, mighty, and tall, evidently inspiring the 10 spies with great fear. Og, king of Bashan, is described in Deuteronomy 3:11. Their strength is seen in giant cities of Bashan today, and we know not how far they may have been utilized by Egypt in the construction of the buildings, which is still an unsolved problem. And I'm probably going to interject a little bit here. One thing with the thing here Egypt, they came in and scribbled their graffiti all over some very old stones that they obviously didn't make themselves, at least the Great Pyramid of Egypt. And I would hasten to add that probably that same method occurred throughout all ancient stones, because there's plenty of evidence to support that Poor construction of less sophisticated peoples came in and built walls right next to brilliantly cut walls. So that's something that one might want to consider when they look at the stones, that the stones were probably something that was far older. As a matter of fact, the Great Pyramid in Giza, that has a shaft that comes out of it that at one time, I believe it was 11,000, 12,000 years ago, where that shaft was aimed directly at the pole star. If one was to reverse time, then that shaft, I have a note here, then that shaft would have probably have been from right here, this shaft inside of the Great Pyramid, right here where the graffiti artists came in and wrote all their names all over the place so that they can take responsibility for these fantastic stones. But I have it to be about 10,500 BC, where this here shaft from way down here aimed right at the pole star, and that would be right at the eye of Draco, right there, and that was the pole star at the time. You know, I understand a little bit about the King's Chamber and the Queen's Chamber, but essentially this is a big clock from what I gather. At any rate, I think that these stones have a lot more meaning than what we actually know of, and I think that this is an important thing to consider. Another thing as well is the word Palestine here. That was a name that was given to certain peoples who lived at that time, and if you are familiar with the history of Palestine and the name changes and etc., and that will probably be pretty clear if you look into it a little bit. Another thing to keep in mind, though, when you read these names of giants and Nephilim and sons of Cain and etc., they're going to mimic the names of God's children's names, such as Abraham. And so it can be very confusing as far as rightly dividing who is who. But typically you can tell that by their behavior and what they do. Not to get it too complicated, but our enemy likes to act like they are not our enemy, and that would be a hidden enemy. And that's their best way or best method of going undetected by us, I suppose you could say. But throughout history, they've always assumed names and taken names and making proclamations of things they didn't do. Satan's problem is that, and same with the fallen angels, is that they're limited to what they can actually physically do. They don't really have any power necessarily. If they want to try to play something and act like something that they are not, then that's what they're going to do. But a lot of people can get taken in by that. But just be careful with the names, I guess. You'll know them by their fruits, I suppose you could say. At any rate, that's kind of my longer comment on some of this information here. I don't always agree with 100% of it, but the Companion Bible, Bollinger, he does a very good job at it, though. So I think I'm done with my commentary at this point, so I'm going to try to finish this up, hopefully successful. We'll see. And it reads, I'm going to pick up here in this verse, or what is this called? Not a column, paragraph, that's what it's called, this paragraph. Okay, and I'm going to go into Arba right here. Arba was rebuilt by Kabiri. or Confederates, 7 years before Zoan was built by the Egyptian pharaohs of the 19th dynasty. And see notes on number 1322. If this Nephelium and their branch of Rephium were associated with Egypt, we have an explanation of the problem which has for ages perplexed all engineers as to how those huge stones and monuments were brought together. Why not in Egypt as well as in the giant cities of Bashan? Yeah, good point, which exists still to this day. Moreover, we have these mighty men, the men of renown, the explanation of the origin of the Greek mythology. That mythology was no mere invention of human brain, but it grew out of traditions and memories and legends of the doings of the mighty race of beings, and was gradually evolved out of the heroes of Genesis 6:4. The fact that they were supernatural in their origin formed an easy step to their being regarded as the demigods of the Greeks. Thus the Babylonian creation tablets, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Greek mythology, and the heathen cosmogonies, which by some are set on an equality with Scripture, or by others adduced in support of it. All these corruptions and perversions of primitive truths distorted in proportion as their origin was forgotten and their memories faded away. I think I made it through at that time. That's the Nephelium Giants, Appendix 26. There's some information in here that I slightly disagree with, but most of it I completely agree with. Again, the names are something that's been mimicked throughout time. And Satan has a way of taking over what God had created and claiming it as his own, as Satan has done with religion and education, politics, economics, pretty much all of it. So it's just a small portion of information about the Nephilim and the giants. And I want to actually reread this final paragraph just one more time. Okay, so the demigods of Greek and etc. Thus the Babylonian creation tablets, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the Greek mythology, and heathen cosmogonies, which by some are set on equality with the Scriptures, and by others adduced in support of it. All the corrupt and perversions of the primitive truths, distorted in proportion as their origin was forgotten, and their memories faded away. So, that's that with that part. Thanks for listening, and God bless you. And I would like to say hi to Wendy, and that our prayers are with you and for you, and we understand your position, and we hope that you will get some relief and some rest.